to see and listen to remember and accept. I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Tova Green, and I'll be introducing our speaker this morning. We're very fortunate to have as our speaker today Professor Paula Arai, respected teacher and scholar. She holds the Ashini and Kakushini Chair of Women and Buddhist Studies at the Institute of Buddhist Studies in Berkeley. Professor Arai has trained under the tutelage of Aoyama Shundo Roshi at the Nisodo in Nagoya, Japan. Professor Arai has written 2 books that have been extremely helpful to many of us. Women Living Zen, about Japanese Buddhist nuns, and Bringing Zen Home, the healing heart of Japanese Buddhist rituals. Her most recent book, The Little Book of Zen Healing, is a book that is very inspiring for many of us who are healing in different ways, from personal and more widely things that occur in our lives. So Paula, Dr. Arai is a wonderful storyteller, and thank you very much for being with us.
Good morning. It's very moving to be with you all this morning. As we explore the narratives that make meaning out of the headwinds our society faces, today I will share my thoughts on the creative expedient of liberating narrative, a skill that helps with the long game of living the Dharma. With the intention to see the Buddhist tradition from a woman's perspective and illuminate how women or anyone can wield liberating power, I explore the creative expedient of storytelling, a favored method in sutras. To do so, I followed principles I developed to help me navigate the rich terrain. I began with breathing space for not knowing. That involved assuming what evidence I did have was incomplete. It also involved doing as much rigorous research into socio-historical materials and Buddhist teachings as I could muster, and turning to experts to assess the plausibility of my findings. Approaching my findings from an embodied perspective opened up insights into what women might have seen, tasted, smelled, heard, touched, and thought. It helped me humanize them. As Buddhist women, they likely lived with a sense of our interdependence and sought out ways to respond to suffering with compassion. I deliberately sought out Buddhist sutras, teachings, and practices that are not heralded for the way they might support women or are known to have generated suffering for women. I wanted to probe possibilities for engaging in a liberating interpretation of such material. Today, I will share 2 stories I wrote as part of my larger project, a book titled Of Lotuses and Mud, Women Liberating Dharma. To give you a sense of the amount of evidence fortified in these stories, there are 24 footnotes in the 2 stories I'm sharing today. Queen Shrimala, Philosopher Queen. Teachings on Tathagata, the Buddha's womb, are ripe for examining a woman's perspective on a woman's capacity to be enlightened in a female body. Indeed, one of the main texts that advances the Buddha's womb teaching, the Sutra of Queen Shrimala of the Lion's Roar, delivers the teachings through a woman. The sutra is dense with philosophical and technical language. As a Buddhist scholar, I can imagine how the teachings would be more accessible and inspiring if they were conveyed through a story that draws out the relevance for those with wombs. My story weaves together textual and philosophical points from the sutra. The conversation I depict between the queen and her female attendants is a creative expedient for bringing the philosophical teachings to life. But this is not my philosophy. This is the sutra's philosophy. Queen Shrimala was delighted, though not surprised, when the dutiful messenger delivered a letter from her parents. They had always cared for her with rich opportunities for growth, never intimating that a daughter was any less capable than a son. Devout Buddhists, they envisioned her as aspiring to heights beyond her position at the pinnacle of royalty. Wanting nothing less than her full awakening, they encouraged her to study the Buddha's teachings. In due time, the Buddha predicted she would become the Buddha of universal light. He praised her explanation of the Dharma, quoting the sutra, "Excellent, excellent, your wisdom and skillful means are most profound and sublime." Queen Shrimala's teachings went on to become an authoritative force for the pivotal teachings on Tathagata, or Buddha nature as it came to be used in East Asia. One day, with head bowed, 5 attendants approached Queen Shrimala. "Beloved Queen, in what way may we best serve you?" "I have called you to my chambers today because, as young women, you may have been treated in ways that make you question your worth. Our world is filled with ignorance. Such defilements conceal the seed of awakening that lies within each of us. Let me share a teaching that has freed me from doubts and delusions. It is called Tathagata, womb of the Buddha. Though its wisdom is lofty, you can integrate it into daily life. The primary thing to do is live virtuously. It means to pay attention to actions, especially if any, including your thoughts, are motivated by greed or dislike. Such motivations cloud your ability to see clearly. One of the hardest things to see clearly is the nature of self, because things are not entirely what they appear to be. Through our senses, we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, and think. They provide practical information for navigating life. For example, if someone has fallen, you can assist them because you have eyes to see and arms to lift them. Daily life is full of such opportunities to behave virtuously, and our senses are central to that aim. Yet, Our senses can lead us astray, for they only reveal part of reality. If we live as if our senses inform us about the whole of reality, then we act in ways that are not fully informed. This invariably leads to results we do not want. We inadvertently generate frustration, dissatisfaction, and sometimes anger. In this way, we produce our own suffering. Oh, dear Queen, we do not want to live that way. How do we become fully informed? You already have all you need. When you are honest, live with integrity, and sincerely aim to cause no harm to yourself or others, you can trust what emerges from your wombs. They are powerful sources of wisdom. Listen deeply. Wombs provide the conditions for allaying suffering and activating enlightened activity. They are by definition the perfect conditions of a compassionate care, providing all the nourishment and protection needed to grow and thrive. Indeed, being pregnant is bodhisattva work. You are cultivating a Buddha in your body. To nurture an embryo of a Buddha is a momentous responsibility. It is also a major contribution to our world. Carrying a being in your womb is excellent practice for how to live all the time. Since caring for an embryo is concrete and has high stakes, it can spur you to intently cultivate compassion. Focus your senses on awareness of the conditions you are generating. All your actions affect the embryo. Do not worry, though. You cannot stain the purity of the embryo. Your womb is pure, but you must be careful not to coat it all over with defilements, such as exposure to toxins and intoxicants, being selfish or callous, and getting overly stressed. Please be sure to eat healthy food and get sufficient hydration and sleep. Spend time in nature where you can hear birds sing and feel fresh breezes on your face. Caring for yourself is to care for the Buddha growing in you. To protect yourself from harm creates an environment that protects others from harm. Many women have found that it is easier to be virtuous while pregnant. Their wombs tell them that each action has a direct and immediate consequence on the embryo. Since they are living for another being, they are keenly motivated to be aware and to care. Being conscious that the self is not an independent entity is also easier when pregnant. It can also help dissolve the delusion of being a separate self. The corporal connection through the umbilical cord between you and the embryo is direct. In a concrete way, it demonstrates the nature of how all is ultimately interdependently connected. Is this teaching helpful if you don't give birth? My beloved, you do not need to have or use a womb for this teaching to be effective. Wombs, as perceived through our senses, offer only one perspective of reality. Seen through another lens of reality, the womb is the liberating wisdom of emptiness. Through this lens, all boundaries are impermanent, fluid, and ultimately empty of intrinsic substance. Hence, all beings are wombs of Buddhas. Whether you are pregnant or not, have a physical womb or not, you can visualize yourself as pregnant with a Buddhist embryo. All your actions can be done with the intent to care for that embryo. Anyone can live with this awareness and cultivate genuine compassion for self and all beings, turning the world into a womb for Buddhas. You enliven this world by enriching and protecting all beings with loving care. Whether you have your own children or not, please share this teaching. It is most important that all our children develop this wisdom. We have the capacity to stop suffering because all of our bodies are vehicles for birthing Buddhas. Bowing with the Dharma. Bowing with the Dharma is a liberating narrative that explores how a woman might wield liberating power in the face of a misogynist practice and sutra. Everything in the story is based on historical records, except the thoughts and actions I attribute to my protagonist, the nun Lian Lu. I prepared this story before we found the results of the election, but it's still an inspiring story. The Silk Road funneled products, people, and practices from the far west and sundry regions of Eurasia through Chang'an, the capital of the Tang Dynasty, 618 to 907. In the 7th century, it was a buzzing cosmopolitan city that was central to driving a period of rich growth. Not coincidentally, women of Chang'an enjoyed freedom. This is all true. They were known to be confident and competent in numerous activities that fueled the culture. It was in this context that a woman wielded her prodigious skills to actualize her vision of becoming ruler of the country. Wu Zhao, the woman who would become China's first recorded ruling empress, became a widow at age 25 when the Emperor Daizong died in 649. As his royal consort with no children, it was tradition that she enter Ganye Temple. She shaved her head and became a Buddhist nun. At the same time, another woman, age 24, entered the temple. She too was widowed young. It was not unusual for a widow to choose to become a nun, nor that the aristocratic family she had married into raised her infant son. She was given the Dharma name, Lian Lu, lotus dew. The two young widowed novices learned the daily rhythms of a nun's life together. It was a quiet life with a measured pace. Both nuns particularly welcomed chanting sutras, with the fragrance of incense wafting through the air. Ganye Temple drew learned and wise teachers who taught them about the Dharma. They found the teachings on the relationship of form and emptiness an intriguing challenge. One of the teachers' plain explanations was most helpful. The elder nun asked them to look out to the garden where a plum blossom was blooming, even as snow was gently falling. She pointed out how rain had fallen earlier and nourished the tree to grow. Now that the temperatures were colder, not rain, but snow fell. So the form of the water is dependent on particular conditions. There is no fixed essence to water. She gave other common examples of things that are dependent on specific conditions to arise. Leaves changing colors in the cool autumn nights. The moon waxing and waning in the night sky. The vegetables that only grow in the summer. They came to see the causes and conditions of phenomenal reality and how everything is interrelated in an ever-transforming stream of impermanence. The elder nun also asked a series of questions that focused on their own bodies. What have they eaten to nourish their bodies? Where did the food come from? Where is that food now? After the teacher notes that we can see differences of form in male and female bodies, she presses them to consider if a peach becomes female when a woman eats it. Does a peach become male when a man eats it? Is skin male or female? Are bones male or female? She ends the lesson with a teaching from the Sutra on Transforming the Female Body. It's a real sutra. In all dharmas, there is neither male nor female. A few years later, into their life as Buddhist nuns, their temple held a service in memory of Emperor Daizong. Emperor Gaozong attended them in honor of his father. This occasioned Wu Zhao to renew communications with him. Although it was not typical for a royal consort to ordain and then return to palace life, Wu Zhao did. She eventually had 4 sons and was elevated to the highest rank of consort as heavenly empress, ruling alongside Emperor Gaozong. She continued to be devoted to Buddhism and became a generous patron that supported its growth in numerous ways. This is all true. Her 675 patronage that contributed to the massive Buddhist stone carvings in Luoyang, Longmen's grottos, were a harbinger of her future. After Emperor Gaozong passed in 683, Wu Zhao eventually founded the Zhou dynasty with Luoyang as its capital and reigned as holy and divine empress from 690 to 705, interrupting the major Tang dynasty. Empress Wu focused on uplifting women's rights and advanced the idea that an ideal ruler is one who rules as a mother rules over her children. This is true too. To deepen her understanding of Buddhist teachings, she asked Buddhist Huayan master Fatsang to explain the Huayan Sutra. To convey the primary teachings of interpenetration, all in one, one in all, he lit a candle in an octagonal hall he built of 8 mirrors, adding a mirror on the top and bottom. The light of one candle shone clearly in each mirror, which demonstrated that everything is present in each part, an interrelated and interdependent whole. Such teachings helped her see the hollowness of men claiming superiority over women, fortifying her aim to reign over the country as a mother. Despite there being no record of a woman reigning over China before, a Buddhist text promulgated in 690, the commentary on the meanings of the prophecies about the divine sovereign in the Great Cloud Sutra, real sutra, supported Empress Wu's sovereignty. The commentary imparts that the Chakravartin, universal wheel-turning monarch, in the Great Cloud Sutra, referred to Empress Wu. In the Great Cloud Sutra, the Buddha proclaims, Devi of pure radiance, who appeared as an earthly queen, would, quote, reign over the territory of a country in the body of a woman, end quote. Indeed, on October 5, 693, Empress Wu was recognized as an incarnation of the Chakravartin of the Golden Wheel. Empress Wu circulated this text throughout the empire, enjoining monastics to transmit its teachings. Those at Ganye Temple heard the text, prompting, this is my imagination, Lian Lu to reflect on the time she spent with Empress Wu when they were novice nuns 45 years ago. Lian Lu decided to gather a group of her disciples and go on a pilgrimage to pay homage to their Chakravartin empress in her capital of Luoyang and see with her own eyes the giant Vairochana Buddha carved into the Longmen grottos. Waiting for a moderate season, it was mid-spring of 695 when they set off. Lian Lu had turned 70. Her disciples were determined to care for their beloved teacher on their momentous 230-mile journey. The distance was not all on flat land, and they planned to rest for a few days at temples along the way. Weather and health permitting, they anticipated it would take 6 to 8 weeks to reach Luoyang from Chang'an. The long days of walking afforded Lian Lu time to consider matters in a deep and extended fashion. Along the way, they encountered numerous monks. The nuns adhered to the Garudhamma that obliges, quote, a nun who has been ordained even for 100 years must greet respectfully, rise up from her seat, salute with joined palms, do proper homage to a monk ordained but that day, end quote. After the nuns did their bows to a few monks they encountered along the way, Lian Lu pondered how the practice might affect the young monks. Some appeared to be of similar age to her grandson. Though she had not seen her son since she left for the temple when she was 24, she had heard that he eventually married and had a son of his own. Although Lian Lu harbored doubts about nuns bowing to monks in a unilateral practice, she yielded to the practice since she found that bowing helped her dissolve the tenacious delusion of being a separate self. She found bowing itself, no matter the context, embodied humility. Bowing reminded her that she is an integral part of a vast web of activity pulsing with both suffering and compassion. Bowing generated an experience of trust in the interconnected whole. For her, each bow refreshed her awareness of all for which she was grateful. Lian Lu had time to consider that now having a female emperor in a world where previously there were no reigning women, why a woman must bow to men just because they are male. Not only did the practice rile against the cosmopolitan ethos of women engaging in numerous activities that had been the province of men before, it struck her that the practice might be detrimental to monks. The concern grew heavy in her heart as she contemplated what those like her grandson would learn from the practice. If elder nuns continuously bowed down to him for no other reason than they are female and he is male, might it be harder for him to maintain awareness that he is not only not special, but that women are equally capable of liberating wisdom? Lianlu worried that these young monks' efforts to live in accord with the Dharma teachings of no self were being undermined by nuns treating them in a way that exalts them. It might cultivate a delusion in men that they are superior to women, resulting in them treating nuns as if they were not able to fathom the Dharma as well as a monk. Fortified by the positive view of women she recently heard from the commentary Empress Wu promulgated, Lianlu thought about another sutra she had learned back when studying with Empress Wu. The teacher had stressed the passage in the sutra on transforming the female body that proclaims, in all dharmas there is neither male nor female. It had always confused Lianlu how a Buddhist teaching based fundamentally on emptiness could turn around and urge women to change into men. That's what this real sutra does. She had never been persuaded by the 10 reasons the sutra offered for why this would be better for those with female bodies. Given the rhetoric of this sutra and her concern for monks being unilaterally bowed to, Lianlu thought of a way to counterbalance any reifying tendencies that might encourage delusions about the nature of bodies that arise from such texts and practices. While walking along in silence, she mentally composed a sutra on transforming the male body. The sutra on transforming the male body would mirror the female body with similar but opposite admonition. I command my man's body to transform into a female one. Of course, the real sutra, the historical one, says the opposite. Likewise, as the sutra on transforming the female body volunteers 10 reasons why women need to change into male bodies, the sutra on transforming the male body conjures up 10 reasons why a man must transform into a female body. And again, I'm drawing on the historical sutra to mirror it. Men lack the capacity for primordial activity, aka giving birth. 2, they are dependent on women for their very lives and survival, nursing at their mother's breast. 3, thus men are not sovereign of their own bodies. The historical sutra says women are dependent on their fathers and husbands and sons, that kind of stuff. Such dependency gives rise to holding their insecurity and lack of power. To hiding, their insecurity and lack of power. 5, which in turn results in men being boastful and arrogant. 6, closed to others' views and unwilling to listen to others gives rise to spiritual complacency. 7, men are competitive and combative rather than cooperative. 8, men are divisive rather than harmonious. 9, men are short-sighted rather than thinking of future generations. 10 men are lustful. Liang Liu thought an amendment to the Golden Light Sutra would be helpful too. With this sutra, she substituted women for men. And this is a real sutra too. May all men, except for her switching, may all men be transformed into women, courageous, intelligent, and full of wisdom. May they practice the bodhisattva path at all times, cultivating the 6 perfections until they reach the realm of enlightenment. Liang Liu envisioned that if both men and women chant both versions of these sutras, both men and women might be spared delusions about the nature of bodies and self. She was not ready to declare that these sutras were not the Dharma, but she did decide to teach her new ideas to her disciples. Finally, Liang Liu and her disciples reached Luoyang. After doing 9 prostrations towards the palace in homage to Empress Wu, they continued to the Longmen Grotto. Vairochana Buddha towered above them. In awe of the magnificence of the carved stone, they did 9 prostrations. As they sat in the shadow of Vairochana Buddha, Liang Liu shared her reverie with her disciples. Their insight into the nature of emptiness and its relation to form deepened, inflaming their inspiration to share this with men and women far and wide. Riding on the winds of change in the air with a reigning empress, they imagined special preference for a specific gender would melt away into a narrower period of history, and their current insights would be passed down through the generations. The male bias and discrimination against women found in some sutras and practices would be remedied, protecting others from having to suffer as they did. Fortified by rigorous grounding in historical context and reasoning that is informed by Dharma teachings, the creative expedient of embodied narrative enables us to hear the voices of women who we know in our bones paved the way for our presence here, today. The stories connect us to the truth of their profound and sometimes playfully serious wisdom insights.
To invite everybody to stand up and have a stretch. And then we'll have some Q&A. If you have a question, please raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone over to you.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to the upcoming, it sounds like an upcoming book.
Yes.
So looking forward to that. I've got a question about some of the sutras.
Yes.
Were the sutras that you were pulling from and notating in the footnotes, are those from discourses in the Tripitaka, or are those sutras that come, that were, let's say, discovered and attributed as part of the Mahayana schools, Vajrayana schools? Which sutras? Because I'm kind of curious to go through those sutras amongst other sutras.
Look at my footnotes. Some of them seem to be from China, so not part of the Tripitaka. But they are all available to be read. Not Tripitaka, but more Chinese. I'm just trying to think if the cloud one was actually from India or not. Transforming the female body. My footnotes don't give those details, so I'm very sorry. Here. Taisho number 564 for the Sutra on Transforming the Female Body, likely a Chinese origin text well known by Sui dynasty in the 581 to 618. So that is an older text, but of Chinese origin, The other one, Golden Light and the Cloud. Sorry, the notes don't go into those details.
Another question?
Hello, and I'm so glad I was able to make it today to hear you speak on the sutras. And I'm just wondering, what motivated you to write this book and search out these sutras, and how did you go about searching them out?
So I have joined the Institute of Buddhist Studies over in Berkeley in January of 2022, and the first course I taught there was I titled Buddhist Women's Liberating Power. And so one of the assignments was to write a sutra. And then I thought, that sounds like fun. I want to do one. And there were 4 students in the class. It was rich, it was dense, it was inspiring. And I just felt like this needs to be spread further. And I had another book that was already in the queue, and I set it aside, and I thought, the moment is now. We need this now. So that's what inspired me. And then I, chose like the bowing practice. I did one on this apocryphal Chinese sutra on the blood pond hell that's targeting women and menstrual and patriarchal blood. And so I took the most heinous examples I could find and thought, I will challenge myself. If we've been trying to always find a liberating way to interpret, experience these teachings and practices, can I do it with things that have always bothered me? And so I chose cultures and time periods, sometimes because I thought it would make sense. The one about 7th century China was, if you believe in, mysterious hands guiding you, it was like that, because early in the morning I'm thinking 4th century Sri Lanka. And then I sat down at my desk and thought, no, 7th century China. And then I thought, okay, I better refresh my memory what was going on in 7th century China. And Empress Wu, of course, I knew about Fa Shang teaching her about the the Huayan Sutra and the mirrors and the malleable golden lion. But in my study of Empress Wu, I'm not a China expert, but I never learned that she was first a Buddhist nun. I thought, well, that's missing from the historical record that's commonly promulgated. And so I thought, that's it, 7th century and I thought 7th century, then I thought Chang'an's the capital, so we'll put it there. And then Empress Wu is in the 7th century. And this temple, Ganye Temple, it is still now in what's called Xi'an. It still exists. And it's where aristocratic people went to be ordained. And then I found out about what she really did in this sutra and this many Buddhist scholar monastics writing these commentaries about she is the Chakravartin, which of course other sutras are saying you can't even be a Chakravartin in a female body. And but 7th century China, at the crossroads of the Silk Road, was a time alive with shifting paradigms and people breaking through norms. And that's why we could get a female empress. And Tang Dynasty, you know, is a pretty strong dynasty. And she breaks through it for 15 years until her death. It wasn't like they overtook her. She died. And then no one could replace her. And so Tang Dynasty swooped in again. But so that, it felt serendipitous, but it also felt like I'm not doing this by myself. That there are causes and conditions that I'm just trying to listen to and not get in the way. And you know, there are more stories that had these qualities to them. Why did I choose that century? And then I find out, oh my God, this was going on here? So it's not going to be a long book because I want it out soon. And but I'm hoping it will plant the seeds in people to, you know, if a lot of suffering, if not all, is because of our perception is underinformed or misinformed, that we do have the creative power not to you know, wipe away the injustice and suffering. But if we can find a liberative way to understand oppression, then we have more strength to respond with compassion. And we all know we have to be very creative in how we're compassionate. And so this is my way of encouraging people, be creative about how you work with suffering and oppression and injustice. And one of the keys, aside from being an embodied perspective, was to engage in a compassionate interpretation of that which on the surface looks like it generates suffering. And that's what gave rise to Lian Lu realizing, oh my God, this bowing to the monks is probably hurting them. Because I had her get in an embodied perspective looking at what suffering might be generated, not assuming that it's all someone trying to push someone else down, because we all know that what's that phrase, if you're holding someone in a ditch, you've got, you know, one foot in it yourself. And taking that principle seriously. And we all have a lot of creative challenges. to how do we find the compassionate response today.
You really did answer my question, Paula, so thank you. But I just so deeply appreciate how you took the sutra and turned it around. It really opened my eyes and helped me to have gave me a path to consider having compassion for people who I feel like are oppressive, because that's a big struggle I have. It is upsetting that it continues in many Buddhist traditions, the oppression, and it's in every religion, I suppose. Every religion has this higher teaching, and then what happens on the ground is a totally different thing. Often, not everywhere, but in some things, just how women in some even Buddhist traditions don't have the same standing as men. But it's a painful thing to process. But thank you.
Yeah. And I will say, I've learned to be careful in trying to see women's contributions to the Buddhist tradition. For example, the word misogyny. It's a double-edged sword. Because yes, it is pointing out injustice. It's pointing out the problems. But to say the Buddhist tradition is misogynist is to totally wipe out all the contributions the women made. And they were following the Dharma, many of them. They were not misogynist. So we have to be careful what stories we are telling. Because the story that the Buddhist tradition is misogynist is an androcentric view. It is not the view most women had, even as they are oppressed by some teachings and practices. They didn't all just drink the Kool-Aid and said, oh yes, I must be inferior. And we have historical documentation of the spunk, the creativity of women, and those I highlight in other stories. So yes, let's be careful. That's the narrative, the power of narrative to shape your perception and therefore your experience, and to disempower yourself is something that we need to have our eyes wide open with these days, always, but we all understand why it's important now. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Arai. I have heard from many, well, particularly a young woman who has been involved in Buddhist studies, that the field of Buddhist studies, I think I can see that myself, has been dominated by men. And I think now there are more women scholars like you who are changing the way we're learning about our history. And I wonder if you can comment on that. Do you see a shift in Buddhist studies which supports more women like you to be innovative in what you write and study?
Well, that's a very personal question, actually. I kind of have the scars to prove it. So yes, when I started in the early 80s working on this, compared to now, how many years has that been? Like 40 plus years. Now it is safer to be a woman scholar of the Buddhist tradition. It's safer for someone of any gender orientation to focus on the content of women. And part of it is the review processes for who gets published, who gets the jobs. It's taking a long time because you've got to get women put into places of decision making. I think it's okay to say it. I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement at one situation where I think this is fine, that in a tenure review that I stopped because I saw it was not following the rules, and I didn't want to bring a legal case because they had much more money and power than I did, and I was the only one to raise my son. So I chose not to file a suit, but one of the comments, there were lots going on, but one of the comments I received from someone who was so-called on my side, senior scholar, said, yeah, you got these reviews, external reviews of me, but one was by a woman, and it was very positive, but because it's a woman, we'll have to dismiss it. I thought, too bad I didn't have a recording of that. Like, didn't this person realize that was illegal? But, so I don't think things like that happen as much anymore. There is still, though, it's still a little bit more uphill when you are female and working on women, especially women and their bodies and their feelings. Because the Buddhist tradition, the field of Buddhist studies, arises out of people who grew up in the Judeo-Christian tradition with the logos and, the word is God. And so the text was seen as the source of the truth. So we are now finally, 40-some years on into me working on women and their embodied on-the-ground practices, we're finally at the point where the field, people in the field recognize that, maybe they haven't gone this far, but that little slice of text from the male monastic elites is that it's just a tiny slice of the tradition. And most people didn't read the text, they didn't live according to them, and they practiced the Buddhist path for, 2,500 years. And so the majority of what is the Buddhist tradition, we have no idea. We have some. There's some archaeological things and other things that we can get at. But what people felt in their hearts, we can only see the artifacts that are left, that we can imagine what someone must have cared about to produce that kind of artifact. And that's why, another reason why I decided the imagination is used to interpret all these texts. It's not like I'm uniquely using the imagination. I'm just using it in the service of using the Dharma, using history, using culture to imagine what might have been that we're never going to get at some of these private conversations. But when you put it all together, you realize, oh, maybe, and just that maybe that's to breathe space for not knowing and to make it so you can't just say the Buddhist tradition is misogynist. That storyline is, although it seemed at first like it was an awakening, it's really been an oppression. Because, especially, I will say, people in the West, where the tradition is younger, people where the tradition has been around longer, the women know. It's like, yeah, they're at it again. But in this cultural, socio-historical moment in the West, most people haven't, had grandmas and great-grandmas teach them, and they learn with their bodies the Dharma. And we have been learning through texts. And so there's an imbalance in the understanding of the tradition if that's your primary source. Of course, our own experience and realizing, wait a minute, what's wrong with that? But I realize in going around to different groups that being given permission to see anew, to say maybe that isn't true, or maybe it's only someone's truth, not everybody's truth. That's what I see the role of scholars today, is to shine lights and pass lights out, so everybody can start shining lights, because we have such a distorted view. And so the authority that the texts have, and I'm grateful they do all that work, but it's only a small slice. And it might not be the slice that matters most when you're on the front lines of suffering.
That is all the time we have. Thank you.
Okay.
Equally extend to every being and place with the true merit of Buddha's way. Beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable.